Professors FM.
I'm Bridget Stomberg.
And I'm Lisa D. Simone.
And this is Taxes for the Masses.
Today's episode is on the latest tax research presented at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's annual Tax Symposium.
In March of 2025, researchers from around the world gathered in Chapel Hill at the University of North Carolina to discuss various different tax issues. In today's episode, we discuss the conference and talk about two particular papers that were presented. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, B.
We are talking about the UNC Tax Symposium, the 28th UNC Tax Symposium.
It's fun to be here with you.
It is fun to be here with you. And as always, we'll just start the episode with a little bit of chit chat about the conference. So yeah, 28 years of this conference. And I think we've been coming for I can't do math, 10 years-ish?
No, more than that.
More than that.
Because we started coming as PhD students.
We did. I don't know when that was.
So it's more like 15 years.
Okay, we'll say some baker's dozen of years that we've been coming to the
God,
UNC
that makes
Tax
me feel
Symposium.
old.
I know.
Okay.
Sorry about that. It's a great conference. It's usually in the spring. And I think that's a new addition because we would hear some stories about when it was in January and
snowstorms. And yeah.
But in recent years, I feel like it's been in March and April. And there are worse places you could be in March or April than Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Yeah, it's actually been really nice to see the beginnings of spring. Like the dogwoods are starting to blossom and it's just lovely.
Yes, good weather. Lots of sunshine, very nice facilities. We've got the conference center, the hotel is attached. It's really great from a location perspective.
I mean, what you really care about is the food. So let's skip ahead to the food. The cool thing about the venue is they have these little mini kitchens.
Oh, yes.
That are stocked
Excellent.
with ice cream. And importantly, last night for us,
yes,
microwave popcorn with plenty of butter
which
on it.
For some reason we decided we needed after a 3-course meal.
Oh, it was necessary.
It was, apparently, because we ate the whole bag.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, it's an executive conference center, so you have all the amenities of home. Mm-hmm. It's very nice. Also, from the actual content of the conference, this tends to be, I would say, one of the more diverse conferences that I attend, at least on an annual basis, in terms of the invite list, and typically the papers vary a lot in topic.
Yeah, a wide range. All tax, but a wide range from, how technology impacts taxes to what's happened to the tax labor market, the effect of political ads on tax compliance, diverse set of topics.
And I guess the history of the conference when it started was having this idea that there are lots of people who do tax and tax adjacent work. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't it be nice if we could all get together, the lawyers, the economists, the public finance people, the tax accountants, and learn from each other, learn about each other's research, maybe inform each other's research, because we're all looking at the same thing through different angles. And sometimes that's the best way to really understand a topic, is to look at it not through the same lens all the time.
Yes, it's a very interdisciplinary conference.
Great way to put it. Mm-hmm. There's typically some sort of practitioner-leaning presentation as well, and today there was a really lovely panel on tariffs.
Which we've done an episode on.
Yes, to circle back to your comment about my criteria for evaluating a conference, the food, I will say that the snack rooms are great. The snack selection during break time is also good. Today they had some quite delicious white chocolate macadamia cookies.
Gross.
Why?
All of that sounds gross to me.
No, none of that is gross.
Disgusting. White chocolate should not exist.
But agreed on its own, but in a cookie, melted down. I think there was some caramel in there.
Nope, agree to disagree.
Oh my God, okay. I figured for someone who couldn't have chocolate.
If I can't have the real thing, I'm not going to try to fool myself with disgusting white chocolate. No, it's not happening.
Okay. Sorry I brought it up.
You should be.
Anything else to talk about conference-wise before we get into the meat and the potatoes, which is what we had for lunch today?
Okay. Moving on from the food. Yes, there are two papers that we want to talk about today. One is about the tax labor market, and the other is about also the labor market.
What now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's nice to have a theme.
Wait, how were there two papers about the labor market today?
I mean, we're talking loosely speaking.
Okay, I get it. Yes. Okay, I'm with you now. So one is actually about the labor market, the accounting labor market.
Yes.
Which we've actually talked about quite a bit on the pod. So
We've had a couple episodes on this. Yes.
Happy to see this paper pop up because it gives us yet another opportunity to talk about the accounting labor market. And then I see what you did there. We're also going to talk about executive compensation.
Yes.
Which is clearly tied to the labor market.
It is indeed.
All right, I'm with you now.
Okay. The first paper we're going to discuss today is how companies responded to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in terms of their tax department labor.
The title of the paper is The Effects of Tax Reform on Labor Demand Within Tax Departments, and it is joint work by Henning Giza, Dan Lynch, Kim Schultz, and Karen Sareth Sloan. As a consumer of academic research, you always like it when the title tells you exactly what's going on.
Yes.
Which is what this paper does.
Yes.
So this paper is looking at the effects of tax reform, specifically the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or the TCJA, on companies' demand for personnel to work within their tax department. So why don't we start with a little bit of background to set the stage, and then we'll get into what the study did particularly.
Okay. So if it hasn't been abundantly clear based on all of the episodes we've done on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it was a really, really important sweeping set of reforms, the largest set of tax reforms that we've seen since 1986.
Yes.
Trump wanted to simplify the tax code, but it also made many things much more complicated to, as tax policy does, to achieve a diverse set of goals, which are not always just raising revenue.
Correct.
And a lot of those complications came for multinational corporations. There were significant changes to the way that the United States taxes the foreign earnings of those multinationals.
Yes.
We transitioned from a world in which the U.S. claimed the right to tax them, generally speaking, to a world in which the U.S. does not claim the right to tax those foreign earnings, but still does tax them through a couple of anti-abuse provisions. And then also added in in addition to those punitive sticks, a carrot to try to get companies to put more of their activities domestically.
That was a lot.
It was a lot.
And I think we can count at least 4 different provisions that were targeted just at that goal, right?
Yeah.
Getting U.S. multinationals to bring stuff back from foreign countries into the U.S.
Right.
Economic activity and sales and all of that. 4 separate tax provisions just to deal with that.
Yes.
Then we also had other things sprinkled in, like limiting the amount of interest deduction that companies can claim. We changed the way that executive compensation gets deducted. We changed the way that net operating losses get dealt with. Like, we did a lot of different things.
And that's all on top of a giant rate change.
Oh, yeah, that too.
That too. So yeah, there were a lot of complexities with the new tax laws that changes the way companies are going to try to navigate tax complexities, navigate taxes, avoid taxes, to put it very bluntly, right? And there was also a lot of uncertainty around exactly how some of the provisions that were written by Congress people would translate into actual enforcement, actual implementation. A lot of that tends to be left to the Treasury Department to figure out after Congress actually writes the law. And I think we're still waiting on guidance on some things.
Oh, I'm sure. Or things are being litigated or will be litigated. Yes.
Yeah.
You can't do something that major and expect to get it right.
Right.
On the first or second or third pass. So yes, basically the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, particularly for large multinational companies, introduced an era of enhanced complexity and enhanced uncertainty.
Which presumably, theoretically, could get companies to want a little more help navigating the complexity and uncertainty.
And that's exactly what this paper is examining. So the general question they're asking is, when you have a tax reform that is creating complexity or enhancing complexity, creating uncertainty, how are firms going to respond to that?
Yep.
So the paper kind of lays out 3 different ways that companies could respond, broadly speaking.
Okay.
First, they could just say, well, I can't possibly deal with this. I'm going to go get some external help.
Advisors,
public accounting firms, whatever. They could say, well, maybe I don't need people to do this work. We're in an age of technological advancement. Maybe I can enhance my investment in tax technology and get the robots to do the work for me.
The robots who are going to take over everything. Yep.
Absolutely. Or maybe I do need some more in-house professionals. And I don't look at those three things as mutually exclusive.
Nope.
Like you could
do all three.
Right?
Totally.
So not an either or situation.
Mm-hmm.
So what these authors are going to do is they're going to look at the job postings, just both the number of job postings and the skills that are included in these job postings for the S&P 1500, so fairly the largest firms in the U.S. Around the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
And they use data I'd never heard of before.
Same.
It's from a company called LinkUp, not LinkedIn.
No.
LinkUp. So they use a pretty sophisticated textual analysis approach called Bag of Words to classify jobs as tax or non-tax, and also to identify the qualifications these companies are looking for when they are hiring tax professionals.
So that's the data that they use, and then the method that they use, because whenever you're trying to do something, looking at a shock or a change that happens over time, you have to make sure that you're not capturing just like an on average effect, right? So if they did see an increase in postings for tax professionals in the US, maybe that's just reflecting the fact that the economy is good and it's not directly related to anything having to do with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So what they're going to do is they're going to estimate what we call a difference in difference, where they're going to look at the increase in job postings by US firms relative to similar UK and Canadian firms. So they're basically trying to identify a treatment sample and a control sample and to kind of hold, global macroeconomic effects constant. And their hope is that they're going to find a relatively greater increase in jobs in the US relative to UK and Canada. So that's the setup. So what do they find?
Well, they find that the number of job postings does indeed increase after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act incrementally for firms in the U.S. relative to those control firms in the United Kingdom or Canada. On average, they estimate a 47% increase in job postings, which amounts to about 2 professionals per firm.
Yep.
And that increases the size of the average tax department by about 28%.
That's significant.
That's big.
Yeah.
That's big. Hiring starts around September of 2018, which is almost a year after the provisions were passed. Mm-hmm. And that makes some sense, I think, because firms really needed some time to understand how the act was actually going to impact them. And they also find strong effects for larger firms.
So all that I think is logical.
It is.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
The discussant was John Barrios from Yale, and he said that this sort of delayed effect is consistent with what you would think of like a search and match theory in labor econ, where it's going to take you a minute to figure out what you need, and then it's going to take you another minute to update your hiring practices to go find what you need. So the fact that there was like a 9-month delay is not, it's logical.
It's totally logical. Yeah.
They also find that demand is stronger for tax compliance jobs than tax planning jobs. So when you think of tax compliance, you're thinking about actually completing the tax return, making sure that you're just following all the rules.
Right. All of the new rules, trying to get it right.
Absolutely. And they also find higher demand for tax technology skills and data analysis qualifications. Mm-hmm. We will eventually have Katie Doherty on the podcast. She is a current PhD student at IU, and her dissertation is looking at how the TCJA affected same thing, job postings, but in public accounting firms.
And I'm so glad that she's looking at that, because there were several comments from the audience trying to push the authors of this paper to look not just at what's happening in the internal tax departments, but also at what's happening with the accounting firms. And I think that's too much for one paper to do both.
Agreed.
So these two papers are going to complement each other perfectly.
And what I love about it, and what I love about their particular pattern of results, is I think it all makes sense. And it goes back to that theoretical framework that they lay out at the beginning of their paper, which is that those 3 responses, hiring more external advisors, investing in technology, or investing in internal people, those could all be happening at the same time.
Yep.
So spoiler alert, Katie's paper suggests that public accounting firms are trying to hire more tax professionals. So to me, maybe it makes sense that the authors of this paper are finding more emphasis on compliance internally. Like, I'm going to do my compliance internally. I'm going to outsource my planning.
That makes total sense.
The fact that they find higher demand for technology and data analysis, maybe I'm going to also increase my investment in tax technology internally. And then I need a human being to talk to the robots internally to make sure everything runs as planned.
Yep.
So I think they're opening up a really interesting line of research to understand how tax reform affects all of those responses. And then maybe there's some responses that we haven't even thought of yet. Thinking about Caitlin's dissertation, how does it affect outsourcing?
Yep.
So this intersection of accounting and the accounting labor market and tax reform, I think it's pretty exciting. And there's lots of other work I think that we could see coming out of this area.
I agree. The second paper we're going to discuss today examines whether there's information in executives' behavior around their stock option exercises and restricted stock vesting.
The paper, entitled Inferring Corporate Insiders' Beliefs About Firm Value from Tax Withholding Elections, is co-authored by Ryan Clark, Tom Kubik, and Babajide Wintoki from the University of Kansas. And I hope that I got that name as close to correct as I possibly could. Apologies if I was very far off.
So this is a really, really interesting idea. And our sharp-eared listeners will remember that we have done an episode on executive stock options using the example of Elon Musk,
Yes.
who very much did pay billions, I believe, billions of dollars
Yes.
in taxes on the exercise of his executive stock options. So the tax impact of this type of compensation is real.
It's huge. So just like we did in the first paper, let's hit up some background and then we'll get into the setting. Quick reminder is that executives of public companies not only get cash comp, they also get stock-based compensation. So compensation that is tied to share price. And the two most common flavors of stock comp are options and restricted stock.
Okay, so let's focus on restricted stock.
It's a little bit easier.
With a share of restricted stock, I just get that stock when my award vests, when the restriction expires.
Yep.
Usually time-based, but it can be performance-based or it can be anything else that is causing that restriction.
Yep.
Let's assume it's time-based. As soon as that amount of time expires, I get that share of stock. Let's call it worth $100. And I don't have to do anything at all. I've already done my thing by staying with the company for that period of time.
Yeah. And so from that perspective, a single restricted stock award is more valuable than a single stock option, because with an option, you have to pay some money to get the share of stock. Here you don't.
Exactly.
They just give you the share of stock. All right. So what does this have to do with taxes? Well, the executive has taxable income when the stock award vests or when they exercise options, but we're kind of leaving that off to the side. So let's keep going with this restricted stock award example. I worked for the company for the amount of time that I was required to, and I vest in this restricted share. I get a share of stock that's worth $100.
Yep.
Well, I got it because I worked for the company for this set period of time. So that's
Yep.
$100 of compensation for me.
Yep.
If we assume my tax rate is 25%, I'm going to owe $25 of tax. And that is not a big deal. I have $25 of cash lying around somewhere. If not, I'll go into my daughter's piggy bank. I'll borrow $25 from her. I have cash that I can use to pay that tax.
Okay, but the story gets a little more complicated if we're talking about executives.
Yes.
Because they're not just getting one share.
No.
They're getting many, many, many shares. So let's imagine that instead of that one share restricted stock award, I actually get 10,000 shares.
Yes.
Still valued at $100 each. So now I have $1 million of compensation and I owe $250,000 of tax. And even though I'm some rich executive, I might not have $250,000 just laying around in cash to pay that tax.
And so understanding that potential liquidity dilemma,
Yes.
executives are allowed to use some of the shares to actually pay the tax. So instead of converting all 10,000 of those restricted shares to stock that I own, I can convert only 7,500 of those shares and have the company withhold the remaining 2,500 shares to cover my income tax liability. So at the end of the day, instead of having $1 million worth of stock, I only have $750,000 worth of stock, but I didn't have to go get cash to fulfill my tax liability.
So obviously liquidity is going to be a factor here.
Yep.
But if we assume that these people are wealthy enough that they can just, they're going to be able to pay their taxes.
Yep.
Then on the day that the executive makes that choice, do they use shares and have those shares withheld to pay the tax, or do they not and think that they're going to be able to cough up the cash themselves? Mm-hmm. On the day they make that decision, they shouldn't really care which one they do. Again, assuming they would have the cash to pay the cash.
They don't have to borrow it or something like that. Yeah.
But if you think the stock is going to appreciate and go up in price in the next few days or weeks, you don't want to have those shares used to pay the tax.
Nope.
You'd rather hold on to those shares and ride that appreciation, increasing your wealth.
That's absolutely right. So if you think the stock price is going to increase, let's say by 6% in the next short period of time, then if you keep those $250,000 of shares, you're going to generate a gain. You're going to get a 6% return on that value. In that case, if I think the stock price is going to go up, I would rather pay my taxes with cash, assuming again that I have it.
On the flip side, if I think the stock is going to decline in value over the next few days or weeks, I would so much rather use the shares today at their higher valuation to pay my taxes and keep my cash.
So it's a pretty cool
It's clever
setup.
Yeah.
I kind of like it when papers, it's like, I've known about this. We've all known about this. Like you said, we did an episode about this, but I never took it the next step of like, okay, what does this possibly mean? So this is where the authors come in with this specific research question, which is, can you actually like infer something about share prices based on the executive's behavior? So specifically, are share prices more likely to increase when executives who are insiders of the company use cash to pay their income taxes? And conversely, are share prices more likely to decrease when the executives use stock to pay for their taxes?
Put differently, the decision of executives to either use shares to pay their taxes or to instead wait and use cash to pay their taxes could signal what they believe is going to happen to share price. And if investors catch on to that, you could trade around this strategy.
Absolutely. And the reason, before we get to the findings, we're going to keep you in suspense for one more minute. The reason why this is so cool is you may know that there are bans around insider trading, right? So if an executive thinks or has insider information that leads them to believe that the stock price is going to increase in the near future, there are limitations to them being able to go into the open market and purchase shares of stock to ride that appreciation wave. And there's a lot of attention to that, right? So the I think it was the discussant today, Brian Cadman, brought up the fact, like, we all know Martha Stewart spent 5 months under house arrest for insider trading.
She actually went to a low security facility, all women's facility.
Okay.
For, I don't know if it was 5 months, but it was for a little while.
Okay. So there were real consequences to this. There was another example of someone who spent 11 years in jail for insider trading that the discussant presented today. So lots of attention and focus and maybe some scrutiny, real scrutiny and risk around actually buying the shares
or selling shares
or selling them to ride this change in stock price. But this particular thing, this idea of withholding, even though it's reported to the SEC, the authors provide some pretty compelling evidence that it's just not scrutinized as much. So it's almost like this is a kind of a secret way to do some insider trading.
Way of insider trading.
Potentially.
Yeah.
So what do they find?
This happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you might imagine, with all of that buildup.
We wouldn't be talking about it otherwise.
Yes.
So they find, predictably, even controlling for lots of other things that are happening, that when an executive is more likely to use the shares to pay their taxes, stock price is more likely to decline. When they're more likely to hold on to those shares and use cash, stock price is more likely to increase.
And this information is known about, I think it was about 2 days after the decision is made. The information is filed in public filings, and traders could trade based on that signal that's being provided by executives.
And one of the things that I thought was really cool, and they've got a good research design, but they actually presented some anecdotes of the same executive one time making the choice to use the shares to cover the tax, and another time using cash to pay the tax, and the stock price did exactly what it was supposed to do. So the reason that example is so helpful is that it's not like some people are always doing one thing or always doing the other. It is an anecdote, but it's consistent with their general evidence that this behavior does map into share price.
Which is incredibly economically important. It raises a lot of questions, I think, about insider trading and how it should be enforced. Should this be enforced and scrutinized in some way?
Yes.
And just a really clever setting, as you said. Like we've known that these options exist for executives, but nobody's taken it to that next step of trying to figure out what executives are saying, predicting about stock price when making these decisions.
So another really cool paper.
Super cool paper. So now it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the good is so easy. And no, it's not cookies.
Well, it is cookies. I mean, it can be cookies and it can be both and.
Let's prioritize here.
Okay. Yes, fair.
Far more important that we get to be here in person recording together at a conference and you don't have the vid.
Yeah, it's been a minute. And have to give a shout out to Jeff Hoops because I got to this conference in Chapel Hill via Boston because I had spent the whole week traveling for IU and totally did not pack my microphone. And so Jeff came to the rescue at the last minute with a mic so that we could actually do some podcast recording because
Thank you, Jeff.
I am irresponsible and cannot be trusted.
These are things I knew. Also, if she had texted me, I think I calculated like 3 hours sooner.
Oh no.
I could have brought a second mic for you. So
I cannot be trusted.
You cannot be trusted and you're a terrible communicator. Good. All right. So that's the bad. Bridget can't be trusted and she's a terrible communicator.
That's fair enough.
What else? I
have some more good.
Who are you?
Well, COVID changed my molecular structure.
Clearly.
So
when have you ever said, I have some more good?
Great. The discussants have been really great.
I agree with you, but you are shocking me right now.
And I feel like they kind of are mixing it up a little bit this year. The first 3 papers, at least, no tax researchers as discussants.
That's true. Yeah. They've broadened the conference participants and even the agenda by inviting a lot of non-tax accounting researchers and some finance. We've always at this conference had economists and lawyers, but going out to non-tax accounting is a little new and it's good.
It's good. And I just want to give public thanks to these discussants because it's not an easy job. Like if tax is not your bread and butter, we were fortunate enough to have a paper presented at this conference as well. Caitlin Krager, just graduating from UT Austin, presented our paper. It was discussed by Christine Cooney from NYU. She's not a tax person and she had to learn stuff and did an amazing job. And all of these people have had to learn something about the setting that they're studying so they can do discussion. So it's hard work and this is a tough crowd and they've all done a great job.
They've done a great job.
Okay. Any bad?
I don't want to think about when I'm going to see you next.
Yeah. I feel like, if you think about like a sports season, like a professional sports season, we've got like our conference season. And I feel like this is we're getting towards the end of the conference season for this academic year.
Unless you go play in the European leagues over the summer.
Wow. This really does track.
Right?
Anywho, ugly. Any ugly?
I mean, I would wish it were a little warmer. It's not ugly though. It's a small preference.
No, and it was warm yesterday. Were there any lifesavers?
I'm sorry, what?
One of the joys of this conference is that we used to sit at these long tables. It was sort of like horseshoe arena style, continuing our sports metaphor. And there was a bowl of lifesavers every couple of seats. And I would eat all of the red and orange lifesavers out of this bowl. Were there lifesavers?
I haven't seen any.
That's the ugly.
And you're not satisfied with your disgusting cookies?
No, because red lifesavers are very special. Red and orange lifesavers are, and it was like I only ever ate them at this conference.
Okay.
So tomorrow I'll be on the lookout for more lifesavers.
Okay. Well, that's all we have time for today.
Be sure to join us for more tax nerdery on future episodes of Taxes for the Masses.